everybody. Let's see, I'll get myself adjusted here. Well, thank you all for coming. It's really an honor for me to be here, and I thank the mentors and the directors of KSSF for helping me get a little higher, for giving me a better, now you can see me. So that's good. So it's an honor for me to be here, and I'm grateful for the invitation and the chance to share this evening with you. I think this will work, yes. So tonight we're going to talk about the Spiritist Center, its role and mission, like it was already said, everything, a lot of what goes on at a Spiritist Center. And in fact, as you can see in this slide, there's really a lot that goes on in the Spiritist Center. In fact, no different from the word Spiritism, the name Spiritist Center is really kind of hard to define in just a sentence or two, not to mention the role and mission of the center. So one broadly encompassing but useful statement is presented by the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, and it says that the Spiritist Center serves to promote the study, dissemination, and practice of Spiritism, serving those who seek clarification, guidance, and support in handling their moral and spiritual problems. Well, that is certainly helpful, but it could actually invite more questions. Has anyone here ever referred to the Spiritist Center as their church? Like when talking to someone else, maybe you didn't have the time or appropriate circumstances to explain exactly what a Spiritist Center is. And sometimes in those situations, a church or something of the like is just the closest mutually familiar reference that we find. After all, part of coming to a Spiritist Center involves reflecting on our relationship with God and receiving guidance for managing our relationships with one another, and for putting into practice some sort of moral teachings, right? And while there are many places that could fall under the umbrella of all these characteristics, the Spiritist Center has aspects that as a collective whole can kind of set it apart. So tonight I will simply refer to them as a context for introducing some ideas and some clarifications in an interesting way. And we're also going to talk about our role in the Spiritist Center. So how we contribute to making possible all of what goes on here. Now, one of the primary things we have in common with the world's places of worship is our focus on God. Okay? But to be clear, the Spiritist Center is not here to provide or to be our connection with God. And this is exactly what Dr. Emma Bragdon found. For those who are not familiar with her, Dr. Bragdon is a transpersonal psychologist who traveled to Brazil several years ago and visited many Spiritist centers. And she became enamored and inspired by some of the things that she saw. And so she wrote a book about her experiences and things that she hoped to see one day here in this country, particularly in terms of spiritually and spirit-based medical and psychological care. Now, after that book she also wrote many others about these topics in her work with them. But from that first book, I want to share a quote with you that she said, "Spiritism puts the experience of God and spirits back into the hands and hearts of each person." And as she observed, there are no rituals and no priesthood. In this way, she says, you are empowered to create your own connection. You get to cultivate your relationships with the spiritual realm and be guided as needed. You don't need a go-between with the divine. Now, as Bragdon says, you will not find in a Spiritist center individuals claimed to have some kind of holy authority. And in fact, the only hierarchy of authority you might find is perhaps in the operational administration of a center or a federation, for example. When you come to hear someone speak at a Spiritist center, this is someone who simply has the knowledge and the ability to speak, as well as the passion and the drive to share Spiritism through that particular platform. Is not to say that his or her moral character is not important. It is important just as it is for all of us, but adding the factor that this individual is sharing or teaching about Spiritism does in fact make it quite important. Another thing Bragdon pointed out was the Spiritist understanding that you don't need a go-between with the divine. So you'll find no baptisms, no confessions, no marriage or divorce granting, no rituals of any kind. We all have a direct relationship with God, our Creator, with Jesus, with our spiritual mentors and our personal spirit guides. And the role of the Spiritist Center is to help us deepen those connections through moral and spiritual education. Now, an important observation that Bragdon adds is that in spite of Spiritism's focus on God, she says this kind of spiritual education does not challenge the role of any religion or ask participants to make a choice between membership in a Spiritist center and a decision to perhaps study or worship God in some other place. Incidentally, she also mentions that in Spiritism, there's no mention of conversion. Now, yes, we find it important to disseminate Spiritism, to share it, share all this knowledge with those who find it meaningful. But you'll hear of no urgency to convert or to save people or to convince them of the Spiritist philosophy. This is actually one of the ideas I heard in the very first Spiritist meeting that I ever went to many years ago, and immediately I found it very refreshing. So Kardec wrote, "Gather those who come to you and leave in peace those who reject you. Remember Christ's words, 'Formerly heaven was taken by force, but today it's taken by kindness.'" Indeed, Spiritism shows us how to take heaven by kindness, placing the utmost importance on humility and compassion. But it's not simply because it is so, right? You'll find that Spiritism demonstrates this to us. And very helpful in that regard is the core concept of reincarnation. More specifically, the way reincarnation is understood in Spiritism and illustrated all throughout Spiritist literature. But let me interject for a moment to ask, what if we don't like the idea of reincarnation? Because sometimes I hear people say that they don't like it, they don't find that idea to be at all very comforting. They don't really want to come back here. And so because of that, I would like to share some text from Léon Denis with you. He says, "Often I've heard people whose lives have been sorrowful say, 'I do not wish to be reborn on earth.' When one has been shaken by the violent storms of life, it is natural to long for repose. I understand how such a soul shrinks from the thought of recommencing this battle of life, where it has received wounds that are still bleeding. But law is inexorable, and to mount up in the hierarchy of the worlds, it is necessary to leave here all the baggage of appetites and passions which attach us to the earth." He continues, souls that carry those desires beyond the grave are delayed and tied to lower regions. They have not yet understood love in its divine essence, nor sacrifice for humanity. To render themselves ripe for the higher worlds, they must redescend into the crucible, into the furnace where the hardness of hearts melts like wax. And when the dross of the soul has been rejected, and the divine essence extracted, then God calls them to a higher life and a more beautiful task. So Denise says the law is inexorable. We cannot avoid it. And we need to keep in mind that these are ideas that come from more than just mere philosophy, because Spiritism is also a science. And from the very beginning, Allan Kardec was meticulously careful not to take the manifestations nor the communications of the spirits at face value. So we have ample evidence for the existence of the spirits and their ability to communicate with us, and for reincarnation. And we are learning from what the spirits themselves share with us about their own experiences. So all of the resulting knowledge that we have acquired from this is very powerful, but potentially, because what we do with that knowledge is always up to us. And that's where the Spiritist Center comes in, because it helps us with that whole process. In a talk given by one of our fellow Spiritists named Susanna Simoes, for those who don't know her, her talk is entitled The Spiritist Center as a Healing Place. And she says that one role of the Spiritist Center is to empower us to take charge of our own health and destiny. How? By being a space where through study, reflection, and service, we begin to not only believe or have the knowledge that we are immortal beings, but to actually feel more like immortal beings. And I like that, because Spiritism is about more than just knowing we are spirits. It's about having and acting on that consciousness in our day-to-day lives. So let me ask you another question. Do we really need to come to the Spiritist Center to study Spiritism? No. There are, as we all know, innumerable books out there, not to mention websites. There's online videos, podcasts, radio programs, and so on and so forth, right? You name it. So then, are we all here for the passes? Or maybe to see friends? Well, what about people that have been studying Spiritism for so many years? You still see them coming to the public meetings and the study groups. Why? Well, no, of course, you don't need to come to the center, as I said, to study Spiritism. And not even to be a Spiritist, because it's all about what's in your heart, your mind, and your actions. Not everyone even has a Spiritist Center nearby. In this country, still, most people don't have a Spiritist Center close to them. We're very lucky. And for those who are blessed to have a center that they enjoy going to, we all know that while learning at the center cannot take the place of our private study, where we can read a whole book, we can delve deeply into a subject and our own thoughts. In the same way, studying alone cannot offer all the same benefits of coming to the center. Here, for example, we have the opportunity to hear from many different speakers on all different topics. And inevitably, the same topic will be addressed in different ways by different speakers. So the possibilities are almost endless. And by the way, as part of those presentations, we often find out about other resources for checking into later on our own. Now, at the center, We also have the ability to engage in some great discussion, and we can learn a lot by exchanging ideas with one another. How often have you heard someone present an idea, perspective, a viewpoint that maybe you hadn't thought of, or a question, maybe an experience that you can relate to? We see some of this interchange during Q&A, if there's time for that, or even more particularly during the smaller study groups, or maybe the discussions that we have with one another after a meeting. But either way, when we spend time at the center learning about the topic of the day, we have the chance to stop, listen, and just reflect on our own lives. Now, speaking of this kind of reflection, our friend Leon Denis also says this: avoid noisy discussions, vain words, frivolous reading, reading daily papers sparingly, passing lightly as they do from one subject to the next. They render the mind unstable. Well, keep in mind this was written in the late 1800s, so now just imagine us today with Facebook and all the social media, the internet, pretty much our massive daily exposure to information, right? So he soon adds, because of the 1,000 exterior objects that occupy it without cessation, the mind rarely probes its own depths. Its surface, like that of the sea, is often agitated, but beneath it are regions that the storms do not reach. Therein lie those hidden powers that await our call to appear. Anybody ever feel like this? We are so bombarded now with information, and our lives are so busy, quite frankly so intense, that it's very easy to neglect the need to spend time in reflection and elevated thought, and yet it's so important. And this is both in our moments of silent meditation, as well as in settings like this one where we're here tonight. But there is something of unique value when it comes to the time that we spend here in the Spiritist Center. And that is the fluidic or energetic atmosphere surrounding us, referring to the spiritual fluids or energies. And whether or not we are aware, there are collaborators from the spiritual realm who come here. They're here well before we even get here, cleaning this environment, clearing away detrimental thought forms, and actually impregnating it with healthy and restorative energies. And this is beneficial to us not only on a physical level, but also for us mentally, because it helps us to calm and focus the mind so that we can open our mental field and actually assimilate the ideas that are being presented. Now, while the spirits prepare the environment before we get here, they donate energies to us through the passes, they can also work on our perispirits while we're here listening to a speaker. But that is, again, if we are attentive, right, and connected, open to their influence. Curiously, a gentleman named Octoberl Pamphiro, who is a spiritist friend and mentor, no longer here with us in the material world, he once mentioned something interesting that the spiritual director of the center, Leon Denis Spiritist Group in Rio, that he directed, had said to him. And this spirit, named Dr. Herman, once told him that when we have the habit of coming to the center at the same day, at the same time, every week, our discarnate friends and loved ones, knowing that we will be there, can often go there to be with us. And so we might ask, well, how is this place different from my home or my work? Because I'm always there at the same times too. But think about it. Are you in the same mental and emotional state at work as you are when you're here in the Spiritist Center? Or what about at home when you're dealing with all your family responsibilities and other things at home? Do you have the same spiritual environment that you have here, where you're pretty much submerged in this pool of soothing and uplifting energies and surrounded by a whole team of caring and devoted benefactors? This place really offers some unique and some special opportunities and possibilities. But our typical outside venues, they're often filled with the busyness and the worry of our day-to-day lives. So the center has another very important role. Suppose we knew a lot about Spiritism. When we came here, pretty much everything that was said was already known to us. We still need the reminders, the regular exposure, and quite frankly, there's always something more to learn. But all of this regular exposure is important and goes back to having that dedicated time and place for reflection. Of course, we can study and read at home. We can meditate. We can watch those lectures online, all of which can do wonders for our sense of spiritual balance. But how often are we really doing those things? If you are, you know the benefits. But if we're not, we need to be careful, because the distracted mind can become, as Denise said, unstable. And then little by little, our muscles of vigilance, of discipline and faith become weaker and weaker. And the voices of our spirit guides become less and less heard. Not present, but heard. All of this when the exact opposite is supposed to be happening. Our goal is to become more in tune with the spirit realm, more in control of our thoughts and actions. But it's very challenging. In fact, the Spiritist Raul Teixeira, he once gave an amusing lecture where he made the point that Spiritism is not for those who want it, it's for those who can stand it. In part because it reveals our accountability that we each have for our personal and our collective progress. And quite frankly, what we're going to experience after this material lifetime comes to an end. Heaven helps those who help themselves, right? So the Spiritist Center is a great resource. It is a materialization, if you will, of that heavenly assistance. Let's switch gears here a little bit to talk about a third and very significant thing that characterizes Spiritism and the Spiritist Center. And that is the practice of intentionally collaborating with the spirit realm. Let's not be so pretentious as to think that we are the only ones who benefit from the presence and work of the spirit realm. Because without a doubt, any of the world's diverse places that serve to nourish the hearts and minds of those who frequent them are, without a doubt, like I said, in the company, the presence, and assistance of their own mentors, dedicated laborers of the invisible world. But in the Spiritist Center and in Spiritism, we believe in those spirits and in their ability to communicate with us, while some places do not. We study about the communicability of spirits, which not all who acknowledge the communications do. We find it beneficial and appropriate to seek communications with well-intentioned spirits who share their knowledge and support, while some others, though they believe in the interaction with the spirit realm, maybe they don't encourage those communications or they forbid them. And we employ mediumship to provide all kinds of assistance to the suffering, both to incarnates who come to the center seeking help, and to the discarnate spirits who come or are brought to the center to receive counseling, education, relief, healing, much like ourselves. So you see, we have in Spiritism a whole different perspective and approach, both with their foundation in the collective teachings and practice of Spiritism. As someone might point out, there are spiritualist churches that do actively engage in communicating with the spirit world. Yes, and like them, we turn to the communication with the spirits to receive counseling and guidance, inspiration, contact from familiar spirits, all kinds of education, and a lot more. But beyond just receiving those communications, the conscious and intentional collaboration in activities of service carried out by individuals in both the material and spiritual realms is something really special that has a prominent role in the Spiritist Center. And because we have great resources to study what mediumship is, how it works, how to practice mediumship safely, what life is like in the spiritual realm, and how the two worlds, the material and spiritual worlds, are in a constant state of mutual interaction and mutual influence, we can really do some great work then here at the Spiritist Center. In fact, even better, I'd say we can lend our hand to some great work that's coordinated and carried out at the Spiritist Center by the spirit realm. So this includes the mediumship facilitated work of fraternal counseling that's given to these suffering discarnate spirits. And some of those spirits are actually involved in some harmful and persistent ties to incarnates who come to the center seeking help for some symptoms resulting from those detrimental relationships. And in that case, that work is known as disobsession. These spirits are brought to the center by mentors in the spirit realm, and the work is carried out in both dimensions. So then a question we might ask in this case is, why do these spirits need to communicate with and through incarnates to get this kind of assistance? Why can't they just get the counseling from other discarnate spirits, right? It's kind of weird. So, for some insight on that, I will turn to the book The Messengers, where spirit author Andre Luis goes to observe a spiritist meeting taking place in the material world for the purpose of counseling discouraged and embittered discarnate brothers and sisters who are suffering and wanting renewal, but without knowing how to begin the task. And that's how they're described by Andre's mentor, Aniceto. Now, Andre is surprised to see so many of them in this room, and he asks his mentor, since they've already received spiritual assistance, couldn't they congregate in places that were just as spiritual on our plane? And so Aniceto tells him, in fact, Andre, most of the discarnates receive invaluable instructions in our sphere of action. But then he explains that when they arrive here, meaning there in the spirit realm, a great number of individuals feel possessed by an unhealthy longing for groups of their own kind. And he says, to strengthen the ability of these discarnates to adapt to their new habitat, the rescue service is more effective when in close proximity to the magnetic energies of brothers and sisters still involved in the carnal circles. And at moments like these, this room serves as a large incubator of psychic energies for the work of acclimating certain spirit bodies to the new life. And then pointing to all those suffering spirits, he tells Andre, they hear our voices and are indeed consoled by our aid. But human warmth is filled with a magnetism of a more meaningful level for them. And so they experience an awakening of new energies. And this is why our cooperative work in centers of this sort offer advantages that you, Andre, for now could never imagine. This comment from Aniceto takes me to another aspect of this collaboration between the material and spiritual worlds. Because if we think that incarnates are doing some beneficial work at the Spiritist centers, and many truly are, we have no idea how that compares to the efforts being made by the workers in the spiritual side, the side of the spiritual realm. Like Andreas told, we cannot imagine. But we've been able to acquire a little knowledge about this from different resources, including some in English. One I want to share with you now, though, that happens to not yet have been translated, is called, if the title were translated, In the Field of Goodness. And this book is fortunately the subject of a very nice presentation that's available online. It's given by Jusarda Korngold. It's called The Spiritual Side of the Spiritist Center. And something really interesting about this book is that it was written by a spirit named Carlos Alberto Tonini, who was a spiritist during his last incarnation. And immediately, or as soon as he can, upon disincarnating, he asks to go back and visit his Spiritist Center. So then he describes what he witnesses from this behind-the-scenes view of the activity of all the discarnate workers and what they're doing during a meeting that happens at the Spiritist Center. So I highly recommend that you check out this presentation, but just to give you a little idea and pique your interest, the Spirit Tonini, he explains that the various activities were divided among 4 different sectors. We have surveillance, nursing, enlightenment or clarifications, and communications. Now, the surveillance sector is in charge of protecting the inside environment from the intrusion of truly ill-willed spirits, temporarily blind to the light of truth and intent on disrupting this meeting. As Jusarda says, they don't have the will to work on their own inner transformation, and like misery loves company, they don't want anyone else to do so either. Therefore, in defense of the group inside, the surveillance sector uses their own vibration and moral authority, as well as some special electrical instruments to help them ward off these malicious spirits, or let's say spirits with malicious intentions. And then there's the nursing sector, in which we have nurses, technicians, and assistants who use their technical knowledge in spiritual medicine, as well as their moral virtue, to provide various kinds of spiritual treatments. And this is to both the incarnates and the discarnates. They include, for example, the auscultation of patients, which is something like listening to them with something like a stethoscope, like we see here. It can be the monitoring of past givers and the donation of energies from the spiritual realm. We have the fluidification of the water, and in some cases, spiritual surgeries. Now, all of this work is done on our perispirits, our spiritual bodies, to help us with physical maladies caused by spiritual imbalances that can and often do become transmitted from the spiritual body to the material body. But Tonini's mentor Marcos, he explained that those who truly work on their own inner transformation, they will receive the direct intercession of this nursing sector. This is done, of course, through the careful analysis of each individual's case, including his or her merit, okay? But this point about our efforts toward inner transformation is really important. And as Susanna emphasizes in the talk that I spoke of earlier, that is how and where our true and long-term healing really take place. Again, one role of the center is to help us feel, think, and act more like immortal, evolving souls. But on the other hand, and what she points out as being secondary to our real inner transformation, the center also helps us through the spiritual nursing explained by the Spirit Tonini, which is also very important because it supports us mentally, physically, so that we can go and do that work, resulting in the real healing of our eternal souls. The sector for enlightenment comprises the assistance given to incarnate workers of the Spiritist Center by way of intuition. So those who are teaching classes, speaking, counseling to incarnate or discarnate spirits, anyone else that is working where they are sharing knowledge or in some kind of communication, they all receive the assistance of these mentors who are dedicated to helping with that particular kind of work. And then finally, we have the communication sector. So this group is sort of like the backstage crew. Okay, because for example, they provide other sectors with valuable information about the ones being assisted. And this is information that they obtain through some kind of special electromagnetic screens. They have devices for communicating over long distances, diagnostic tools, and all kinds of different equipment. They also actually make outside visits to individuals who the ones present in the meetings are actually praying for, and to help suffering discarnate spirits in the lower regions of the spirit world. But all this is really fascinating, isn't it? The fact that all this is going on in the same place that we're in, but in a dimension that is unseen by us. A Spiritist Center is very much, this is an example, a center is very much an oasis of love and service. But that leads me to my final topic, and that is our role in the Spiritist Center. Because, yes, a Spiritist Center is a place, but a place is not a Spiritist Center if not for the people inside, who they are and what they do. If not for their common interest in matters of the Spirit, but more specifically in the Spiritist teachings. If not for their will to improve their lives by working on their minds and hearts, getting that spiritual nourishment. And if not for their shared desire to help others. So just as we need the centers need us. We are the centers. And so then I couldn't resist quoting the famous expression from President John F. Kennedy, who said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And of course, we could apply the same calling here, only changing country to Spiritist Center. Without a doubt, this could be a topic for another conversation because there are so many ways to help here and really many reasons to do so. Service, charity, gratitude, they all have a prominent focus in Spiritism, and we have ample ways to begin right here in practicing them. So to begin, there's always work to be done. A Spiritist Center is about what goes on inside, as I mentioned, and the people willing to give of their time and their energy to make all of this happen. It's so easy for us to just take for granted that on the day we want to come, the Spiritist Center will be here for us, all that it has to offer. But no one here is paid to do the work, and somebody has to do it. So whether it's cleaning, working in the kitchen, filming, teaching, organizing events, volunteering in some kind of community outreach done by the organization, or maybe working as a pass giver, a medium, a speaker, a counselor, so many things. The Spiritist Center is always going to need people willing to give back in these ways. And really, no task is less important than another, because all of them are needed for the Spiritist Center to work. So if you want to help but you don't know how, just ask. And I'm sure you will be given many suggestions. On the other hand, we have to keep in mind that while the benefits of a Spiritist Center come from and through spiritual resources, a center simply cannot operate if the material resources to pay the bills are not there, right? So, as you know, there's no pressure to contribute. There's no collection or there's no collection or offering that's taken here every week. Any donation or contribution you make is up to you. But for those who have the means, whatever it is, this kind of help is essential to keep any Spiritist Center running. Now, what I've mentioned already comprises probably two of the most obvious forms of assistance that come to mind when we think about how we can help our Spiritist Center. But I actually want to turn our attention now to something else that relates directly to some things I spoke about earlier, and that involve how we can be supportive of this great environment and of all the learning that takes place here in the Spiritist Center. So we reflected tonight on how much being here helps us to learn from and about Spiritism, and to take time out to reflect on our lives in a constructive way. And we also talked about this amazing spiritual environment and the presence of all these benefactors whose work is unseen from our realm. And that, my friends, is something we really have to respect, not just admire and appreciate with our mind, but respect and support through our behavior that does as little disruption as possible to those purified energies. So what does that look like? Well, Altivo, who I mentioned earlier, he spoke about the spiritual discipline that an effective Spiritist Center requires. For example, when we arrive at the center, we are happy to come, we're excited to see our friends, and then we come in and this great environment makes us feel even better. And so when we see people, we want to just go up to them and say, hey, how are you doing? And start talking, but sometimes loudly, as if we're walking into a party or something. But would you behave in that way in a hospital setting? Probably not. But we don't see what's going on in this other dimension. And so without our vigilance, it can readily escape our attention. And we need to stop and remember that, because the last thing that we want to do is give even more work to our benefactors in the spirit realm or disrupt what they're doing with so much love. So, yes, we can talk for sure, but just let's control our exuberance and try to talk in quiet voices. And that said, when it comes to the actual meeting, during the presentations, the passes, and the prayers, we really shouldn't be talking at all, except for time for Q&A or spaces that are open specifically for that purpose. At least, if nothing else, for the benefit of those around us. Because it really can be disruptive when you are trying to listen to a speaker or connect with the spirit realm in silence and prayer, and you have people talking around you as if they're the only ones in the room. And then not only is our concentration interrupted, but our vibration changes, right? As we kind of begin to get a little annoyed with that distraction and lack of consideration. So then we take away from the spiritual environment instead of supporting it. When we have this chance to come to the Spiritist Center, really, we are the ones that also need the silence, and it's actually the silence of the mind. Because when we come in here, we first get here, there's always that moment for a while where we're still physically here, but kind of mentally out there. And so the prayers and opening readings, etc., they help us. Even that music that's playing when we can come and see here and sit down for a while, they help us to quietly make that transition so that we can be here and able to concentrate. But if we don't use them to make that transition, then our minds can begin to wander before we even connect with the speaker. And sometimes we might feel like our attention is just going to anything but the talk being given that day. And that's really sad. I'm sure we've all been there, but, you know, we've talked tonight about how important it is to be here, how much we can benefit from the center and its role, how it can help us, and we'll really be missing out on some great opportunities. So let's just try to avoid that from happening, and even consciously make the decision beforehand to be attentive and mentally connected so that we can benefit from all of this knowledge and from our increased receptivity to the influence of the spiritual realm. And the same goes for the passes. When we're receiving the passes, let's have our thoughts focused on God, you know, connect, elevate them to our spiritual mentors, benefactors. And even we can take advantage of this time to pray for others. Altivo, he talked about this in his lecture, and he said that the Spiritist Center is like a nucleus for the intercessory prayer. This is the prayers where we are sincerely asking for assistance for others, and then the spirits who answer those prayers, they go to those individuals to help them in some way. And you can actually hear more about this in Jusara's video, but we have here in the Spiritist Center the right kind of environment to act as a kind of headquarter for that activity. And just to start, you know, winding things down tonight, we have seen here that the Spiritist Center actually offers the right environment for many things that are beneficial to us, to our mental, emotional, spiritual, even physical well-being. The Spiritist Center indeed has a very important role and mission, but this is not a one-way offering, okay? The center is in every way a place for exchange, interaction, collaboration, so we can both give and receive. We can teach and learn. We can help and be helped. And it wouldn't make sense in any other way, because this is the very essence and meaning of life itself. The Spiritist Center is here to help us live our lives, in fact, our spiritual lives, to their very fullest. And before I close, I just want to put up this slide here really briefly with a number of resources for learning more about what I talked about tonight, including some I used for this presentation. But because I think this is being recorded and will go up online, you can just check it out there and take note of whatever you want, or anyone can feel free to speak with me after or contact me anytime later to ask more about these resources or other ones. And without further ado then, I just want to once again express my gratitude and thank you all so much for being here with me, for your attention. And I wish you a great evening. And as we are getting closer to the end of the week, I also wish you a great weekend. Thank you so much.